After Adam and Eve transgress and are exiled from the Garden of Eden, the biblical account portrays the couple as exhibiting model behaviour. They aren't shown to succumb to temptation, they aren't seen to demonstrate any sort of corruption, and they aren't lured away by the likes of Satan, giving us the impression that they had learned their lesson. Considering there really aren't any noteworthy descriptions concerning Adam and Eve's lives outside of the garden, aside from the birth of their children, believers might be quick to conclude that Adam and Eve lived righteously, and that nothing untoward transpired between them. As far as the devout are concerned, the Bible doesn't say Adam and Eve did anything aside from bearing the likes of Cain, Abel and Seth. And so with that in mind, there's no reason to assume that anything else happened to them. Certainly nothing as sinister as a giant demonic orgy. Indeed, the Bible is pretty slim on the details concerning what exactly happened to Adam and Eve in the years after leaving the Garden of Eden, which you might say is quite strange, given that Adam lived for 930 years. But Jewish accounts from the likes of the Babylonian Talmud and the Zohar paint a far more sinister picture, one that portrays Adam and Eve not as these perfect role models who lived righteous, uneventful lives, but as complex, grieving, perhaps even capricious characters that willingly continue to sin by taking demons to bed. One of the first places I found this legend springing up from was the Babylonian Talmud, specifically Eruvin 18b, where a Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar stated, "All those years during which Adam was ostracized for the sin involving the tree of knowledge, he bore spirits, demons, and female demons. As it is stated, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth." This idea suggests that somewhere during the exile, Adam had, by whatever means, fathered spirits and demons. Who the mother of these creatures was, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar remains quiet, though does supply us with some rationale behind his thinking. He attempts to link this idea with Genesis 5:3, that it was only when Adam had lived his 130th year did he beget a son in his likeness, after his image, but that before this, Adam was creating children that weren't in his likeness and weren't in his image, ergo must have been spirits and demons. Now some might say it's a bit of a dramatic leap. After all, there are some practical explanations as to why Adam had not born a child in his likeness until Seth in his 130th year. First of all, the biblical account makes no mention of Adam even having any children in the years after Cain and Abel. Perhaps he and Eve just simply did not conceive in these years, or perhaps they just weren't having sex. Later Jewish legends that we'll talk about in a moment put forth that Adam and Eve were in a long state of grieving after the death of Abel and the banishment of Cain. Perhaps they didn't want to bring any more children into the world, seeing as how the first set turned out, thus resulting in Adam not having a child in his likeness. The Talmud challenges the idea, with Rabbi Meir saying, "Adam, the first man, was very pious. When he saw that death was imposed as a punishment because of him, he observed a fast for 130 years, and he separated from his wife for 130 years, and wore belts of fig leaves on his body as his only garment for 130 years. If so, how did he father demons into the world?" This interpretation frames Adam as being far too guilt-stricken to have gone about cheating on his wife with spirits and demons, and further condemning himself even more in the eyes of his God. This account tells us that he imposed his own punishment on top of the one that God dealt him, because he was so overcome with remorse. We also get the explanation here that during these 130 years of his life, he was too busy to go about copulating with demons, or even his wife, for he had separated from her in order to fulfill his penance. To conclude this idea, Rabbi Yirmiyah, in the face of such a challenge, kind of backtracks and elaborates that he wasn't referring to Adam having actually copulated with demons, but that such beings had somehow arisen from the semen that Adam had accidentally emitted, perhaps some form of nocturnal emission, and that from this, destructive creatures were brought into existence. Unfortunately, Rabbi Yirmiyah does not further elaborate on such an outlandish claim, but evidently seemed steadfast in his belief that if Adam had not copulated with spirits and demons to produce such offspring, he was still responsible for their emergence, albeit the fault may not have been his own. Whilst the Yeruvian 18b interpretation of Genesis 5:3 in the Babylonian Talmud might sound a little far-fetched, this idea of Adam fornicating with demon kind persists into the Zohar, where we are told that after Cain had killed Abel, Adam kept separate from his wife and did not beget. In fact, he didn't even want to copulate with Eve, giving us the impression that he was grieving the loss of Abel and perhaps even grieving the loss of Cain, who was now banished from him. Rabbi Yos says in this account, "From the hour in which death was decreed upon him and upon the whole world, he said, 'Why should I beget children for terror?' and instantly separated from his wife." Again, this further applies to the point that Adam was grieving, and that because he now knew death, and knew what it was like to mourn, he did not wish to risk losing another child and going through such painful emotions again. As far as he was concerned, so long as he did not have any more children, he could not lose any more children. Therefore, he denied himself even the temptation of copulating with Eve and separated from her. There in the wilderness, Adam would be preyed upon by two female spirits who are identified as Lilith, his former wife in Jewish legend, and Naamah, said to be a daughter or sister of Lilith and the namesake of a daughter of the later Lamech. The Zohar remarks that both Lilith and Naamah came to copulate with Adam and bear him children, of whom were also evil spirits, and who were called the plagues of mankind. We are told, "And they led the sons of man astray, and dwell in the doorway of the house, and in the cisterns, and in the latrines." So in Adam's efforts to distance himself from Eve and physically prevent himself from having any more children that would end up perishing, he ends up having demonic children instead that seem to develop a vendetta against mankind. Adam would then return to Eve, knowing full well of the creatures he had fathered, and proceeds to beget Seth, who, along with his descendants, would be plagued by the very creatures Adam produced with Lilith and Naamah. Through this light, Adam is undoubtedly the most irresponsible character. He not only costs his future generations the permanence of life, something he is seen to greatly regret, but he then further condemns them by introducing spirits that will plague them. Now, you might argue that Adam had no idea that the spirits he bore would have this inclination. In fact, you might go one step further and say that Adam didn't intend to have children ever again, and so he didn't see this as being a problem. But the more Adam seems to do in this narrative, the more his descendants have to pay for it and endure the consequences of his rather impulsive actions. The narrative doesn't touch upon Adam's guilt of having these demonic trysts, nor is he shown to feel bad about these extramarital affairs. Again, you might argue that Adam had split from Eve, and so he technically wasn't doing anything wrong in running back to his first wife and engaging in these sordid demonic sex acts. In fact, going by the Zohar account here, this might very well have been a sort of retaliatory tit for tat on behalf of Adam, for we are told that Eve had been mounted by the serpent, and it was from the serpent's seed that Cain was born. Therefore, Eve would have already cheated on Adam, for the Zohar reconciles that this is why Cain was capable of evil, for he was actually the son of Satan, not Adam. Again, these events are a far cry from what the traditional Bible tells us, where there is no mention of a separation between Adam and Eve, no mention of Adam copulating with spirits, and no mention of Eve being seduced by the serpent. The Zohar concludes that from these spirits, Adam begat many daughters, and that they were so beautiful that many of his descendants went astray after them. Since the suggestion that Adam sired a demonic brood was rooted in the Zohar, the legend found its way into other Jewish narratives and became something of a consideration for many circles. In his work, Jewish Magic and Superstition, author Joshua Trachtenberg noted that the origin of demonkind naturally agitated the minds of medieval thinkers and was of an especial interest for the Jews. He noted that whilst Genesis remained silent on the creation of demonkind, Talmudic traditions provided an idea that God had meant to make another species alongside humankind, but that he'd simply run out of time by the end of the 6th day. In order to sanctify the Sabbath, he was obliged to stop, and so he discontinued the work and did not fashion this second species, which were then left forever unfinished. Supposedly, God had only gotten around to creating their spirits, but he had not dedicated enough time to finishing their bodies. Trachtenberg wrote, "So it is that the demons have no bodies, but are constituted wholly of spirit." But he continues that this explanation of demonkind's origin would not suffice for all medieval rabbis, and whilst it might have accounted for a portion of the demons, it did not account for all the categories, of which there are many. He notes of a Rabbi Jehiel, who mentions specifically the Lutin and the Fey, demons that possessed both a soul and body, which would make the previous argument of God running out of time redundant. Therefore, these sorts of demons required another explanation which coincided with the aforementioned one, but also didn't contradict it. Rabbi Jehiel therefore suggested that in the 130 years after the expulsion from Eden, Adam did part from Eve, and there proceeded to have relations with the unfinished spirits, who bore him demonic offspring, which would account for the likes of the Lutin and the Fey, and any other corporeal demon that seemed to exist outside of God's creation. In his work, The Tree of Souls, author Howard Schwartz simplifies the legend whilst incorporating all of the aforementioned elements, telling us that Adam was filled with grief, and so separated from Eve for 130 years. He also adds from another legend that Adam punished himself by standing in the river Gihon until the waters reached up to his neck, and that he fasted until his body became as wrinkled as seaweed. Such a myth echoes the imagery in the Greek myth of Tantalus, who was punished for his crimes by being made to stand in a river up to his neck. There he was consumed by hunger and thirst, but each time he attempted to drink from the river, it would subside from him. Schwartz continues that during this exile from Eve, female demons swarmed Adam and inflamed him until they succeeded in seducing him, suggesting that whilst Adam resisted at first, he did eventually succumb to desire and lay with them. There he adds that Adam begat mutant demons, hybrids that were part human and part demon. Interestingly, he also adds here that Adam wasn't alone in being seduced by demons, but that whilst he had his hands full with the female variety, Eve was also pounced upon by male demons, and in her loneliness, she too copulated with them, leading to her giving birth to many demonic offspring too. These offspring produced by both Adam and Eve are identified by Schwartz as Mazakim, and that it was these creatures that were responsible for the greater proliferation of demonkind. What makes these sorts of legends so fascinating isn't necessarily whether they can be corroborated with the biblical accounts, but more so that they show how later generations, perhaps particularly the medieval audience, came to wrestle with what Genesis doesn't tell us. How were there demons when there is no mention of their creation in scripture? What did Adam and Eve do in the 130 years between being booted out of the Garden of Eden and producing Seth? Why is there more detail about Adam and Eve's time in the garden than on Earth? Despite being the first characters in the Bible and the progenitors of all human life, the authors of the text were remarkably restrained when writing them. It's easy to see how rabbinical speculation and Jewish mystical traditions grew in the gaps left by Genesis, with texts like the Talmud, the Zohar, or even the likes of the Alphabet of Ben Sira, attempting to fill in missing details to better reconcile the narrative. Of course, not all of these were accepted as canon. In fact, if you're a purist, then you'd probably reject even these ideas and take only what the biblical account has to say on board. However, in doing so, we do lose a darker, more complex portrait of Adam, not just as the first man, but as a figure whose grief, isolation, and moral failure proved to have enduring consequences far beyond his scope. In such a tradition, if Adam and Eve proceeded to sire demonic broods, then it really does reimagine them as some of the most sinful and irresponsible characters from the biblical narrative, and further dramatizes their impact on the rest of humanity. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.